if you think that I, or perhaps any of the speakers, have all of this figured out, I'll be the first to tell you that that is definitely not the case. And so I look forward to learning from each of you in the hallways, in between sessions, and understanding what you're wrestling with as you look at unity, as you look at alignment, as you look at design systems in the places that you work. Some of you come with loads of experience. Some of you are just starting that journey based on just a few of you that I've talked to already. I'll tell you a secret. Speakers love to be interrupted between sessions. We come here for you. We come here to interact with each of you. We love to be interrupted when we're on our phones. I can't speak for everybody, but I can say that many of us use our phones to overcome the uncomfortable feeling of striking up a conversation with other people sometimes. And so an interruption to that process is often a welcome thing for all of us. So please interrupt us at this event. Most importantly, thank you to Gina and the other incredible people that have worked tirelessly to put on this wonderful event. Let's give Gina and the crew a round of applause. I'd like to speak to you today about alignment. When we align, we seek positive outcomes for the systems that we create. We seek consensus on priorities and efficiencies. And when we align, the results can be meaningful and even beautiful. I want to talk to you about three things today, three principles related to when we align. Unity over uniformity, chemistry over culture, and people over process. So first, unity over uniformity. I'll tell you what, you all are doing an important work. I am not involved in the day-to-day rigor of design systems. I've done that previously in my career. But you are involved in an extremely important work. So whether you're far along in that journey or just starting, do not give up. In 2006, I was tempted to give up. So here's the set the stage a little bit. In 2006, I was part of a roughly 40-member design team at the LDS Church headquarters in Salt Lake City. I don't remember what number I was like number 16 in those 40. We had 40 full-time interaction designers in 2006. Now that was kind of unheard of in 2006. You could probably count on two hands the number of companies in tech that had 40 full-time designers in 2006. So for us to have that number of designers and to do it at a nonprofit, no less, was pretty crazy. We didn't have any precedent like we do today for design systems and standards. Of course, we've had things like the National Park Service with design systems that have been around for decades, but we didn't have the design systems that we know today. And so we had to forge a lot of untreaded ground, and it was really frustrating at times to figure out how do we align this organization of 40 designers working on almost 100 websites and apps. I think we got part of the equation right. We got about half of the equation right. I was leading that effort, and we called it visual unity. And I think we got the unity part right. The visual part was a bit misaligned because it focused on only one aspect of being aligned as an organization, the visual, and it left out the functional and some of the other parts of being aligned together. Let me just state that unity and uniformity are both essential to our work. Both seek alignment. Uniformity has an important role in what we do. Probably the most common example I've seen throughout my career is logo usage, brand integrity, so allowing standards and systems that will protect that brand, specifically the logo, among other instances of the brand. So why unity over uniformity? What's the point? At least that I'm trying to make. Well, left unchecked, what tends to happen with uniformity is it will place efficiencies of the system above all else. And so user experience will sometimes play second fiddle to the desire to be consistent, to conform. I think there's a good litmus test for understanding where the priorities lie, whether you're focused on unity or focused on uniformity. And it is this: how are departures from your established system handled. In the case of uniformity, we will often issue a cease and desist order, whereas in the case of unity, often the response to departures will be a question. What prompted the departure? Is the difference, is the rationale for that departure defensible? Should modifications be made that would accommodate these departures from what we've established to be the aligned system for our organization? Going back to that logo example, unity, in the case of unity, would invite a conversation around departures with the logo. Why did the team depart from what was established as the guidelines for the logo? What can we understand about why the brand, in the instance that they were using it, broke down? Or was it simply ignorance of the expectations for brand integrity? What are the ramifications, the unforeseen ramifications, when we prioritize uniformity over unity? How can the systems that we build encourage unity and alignment versus uniformity? I'd like to share two examples that I think highlight the differences between unity and uniformity. The first one I've used in other contexts when I've spoken about design generally, but I think it applies here as well, and it's this idea of a soda machine. You've all used one of these. You've probably used them hundreds of times, in fact. You know how it works. You bring your cup up to the soda machine, you push the button, and the liquid comes out from underneath. The beautiful thing about this behavior is I can go from a McDonald's to a 7-Eleven, from Canada to Dubai, and this interaction, for the most part, remains largely the same. There might be a lever on the backside instead of a button, but overall, the interaction is expected. I don't know if you've ever used this, maybe not this particular model, but you've used one of these before. This is the water dispenser on my fridge. We bought a home in Florida. Everything inside the home was basically in the year it was built, 1986, and so we systematically started replacing the flooring and the fixtures and eventually the fridge. And this fridge had outstanding reviews online, except for one crazy feature. And that is when people would come over to use this fridge for the first time, without question, this is what happened every single time. In fact, it was so reliable that it became a game when people came over, and we would say, they'd ask, "Can I have a drink of water?" We'd be like, "Go ahead." And we'd literally be ready with towel in hand. I never recorded this. I wish I would have done that. We sold the home since then, but I wish I would have recorded this interaction to prove to you that 99 times out of 100, this is exactly what happened. And the reason it would happen was a simple concept, and that was intuition. There aren't really any definitions in the dictionaries that we have that would describe intuition and intuitive related to our industry. This is my attempt to do so, the degree to which users successfully navigate new, unfamiliar experiences based on knowledge acquired in previous experiences. That's why when they come to that fridge, they bring expectations of how it should function, except it doesn't work that way. And so we could say that our fridge is not intuitive because it breaks those expectations. Kind of like if you approach this door, you can't really read it, but it says push up there, and you see the handle, right? There's a disconnect between what you're expecting that door to do and what that door is conveying to you. By the way, Don Norman's book, The Design of Everyday Things, if you've not read that, please do. One of the best books, speaking of alignment and unity. We know this as a Norman door. If you've read that book, you know why it's called that. Well, that's one example of what happens when we look at unity and uniformity. We could argue two things, I think, in that example. One, is the rationale for the difference between the visual presentation of those two interfaces, meaning the soda machine and the fridge, is it defensible? I bet you could come up with a defensible argument for that. That you probably wouldn't want a soda machine looking like thing in your house. The aesthetics of having that, the stainless chrome versus the very industrial feel of that soda machine. I think you could make a very defensible argument about why visually those two things are different. I'm not sure you could make a defensible argument as to why the fridge functions that way, especially when you see the user feedback that comes in from using that fridge. For me, that's the distinction between uniformity and unity. Uniformity would demand that the visual and the functional be identical in all cases, whereas unity allows for differences that have defensible rationale behind them. Here's one other example. How many of you walked, by show of hands, walked 3 blocks or more to get here? Oh my gosh, wow. How many of you, by show of hands, have walked, that's almost all of you, how many of you walked 3 blocks or more in Salt Lake City? Okay. If you've walked 3 blocks or more in Salt Lake City, you know what I'm talking about when I say the blocks in Salt Lake City are absolutely massive. They measure 660 feet by 660 feet square. They have more than 170 feet of roadway and sidewalk in between them. In fact, here's what a typical block in Salt Lake City looks like. It's down in the lower right. Here are other cities throughout the U.S. Contrast that with, for example, Portland, Oregon, up in the upper left, and Salt Lake City. Look at the difference between those two. You can fit 9 blocks from Portland inside 1 city block in Salt Lake City. It's almost, if you were to walk 3 blocks in Salt Lake City, you would walk almost exactly a half mile to walk those 3 blocks. It's just incredible. By the way, you could easily fit the entire footprint of the Empire State Building inside a block in Salt Lake City. You could fit most of the blocks here in San Francisco, which have about the same footprint as the Empire State Building, inside Salt Lake City as well. Well, if you look at historically what happened in 1847, when Brigham Young led settlers to what is now Salt Lake City, he drew up a plan for 135 blocks that were each 10 acres. And there was this idea of a unified community around that plan and the reason for that plan. And so the idea was that, I'll come back to that in just a second. The idea is that you'd have agriculture and homes all mixed within the same block, and that there was a lot of fluidity between how those blocks function. Today, here's that photo. Today, I gotta fast forward through all of this. Today, what you get in Salt Lake City is something that resembles this. It feels a bit hostile to people coming to Salt Lake City for the first time because you have these massive concrete structures that are separated by very wide roadways. That wasn't the plan originally. The plan, in fact, when it was drawn up, was to not have streets be paved to the very edges of each block, but only to have them be paved where the cars would naturally drive. And then the rest was intended to be green space. And so it was a much more cohesive environment of walking, of riding, of driving, and so forth. The reason, by the way, why the streets are so wide, they're so much wider than most of the cities, the big cities that you visited, again, 170 feet, is back in the day, Brigham Young's idea was that you could turn around a wagon team on the street 180 degrees without, in his words, without resorting to profanity. And so making it easy. That's why today those streets are so wide. But what we've taken is this concept of a grid that was originally meant to be inspiration for community, and we've taken it to be prescriptive now, where everything is this perfect block, cement everywhere, and it's, again, for pedestrians and residents alike, it can be a hostile place. So over the last 10 years, there's been an effort in Salt Lake City called Downtown Rising to bring back some of the original plan for more mixed shared spaces. You can't see it too well in this image here, but this is I think this is Regent Street downtown, where they've actually shrunk the street, and they now have shops and so forth that will line the edges. I think this is the risk that sometimes we don't foresee when we think about alignment and we skew towards uniformity. This is what we saw previously, at least the previous photo, is the result of focusing on uniformity over unity. I could talk your ear off about this. I love this topic, but for now, let me just say, please put unity above uniformity. I think you'll see a couple more things that I mentioned today that will touch on this topic. Second, chemistry over culture. I think culture is an amazing thing. Culture it's more than just customs and norms and behaviors. Culture has fostered movements of social good. It's enabled the rise of democracies around the world. It's empowered the overthrow of tyrannies in the darkest corners of our planet, singular, not plural. Culture usually suggests some sort of grouping of similarities. They either begin similar, those things begin similar, or they evolve to become similar. On the surface, this is a good thing for the most part. However, in societies and governments and often corporations, companies, problems arise when poor behavior is amplified by the absence of dissimilarities that would otherwise offset bad actors in the system. That's why when speaking about culture, especially company culture, we often try to attach favorable adjectives, such as a positive team culture, a healthy company culture, just to make sure that we're not talking about bad company culture. Unfortunately, culture, despite aiming to unify and even diversify, often leads to uniformity. Chemistry, on the other hand, I like the word chemistry. It's about blending similar and dissimilar things. It's in the workplace, these things might be people, they might be perspectives, backgrounds, customs, tools, and so forth. It can lead to beautiful outcomes. It can lead to not so great outcomes either as well. Some explosive outcomes, but culture isn't excused from this either. We have plenty of examples of bad culture in our industry. I don't need to go into those, but with chemistry, this isn't necessarily just a semantics thing. And I'm not expecting you to go back and talk about chemistry necessarily with your teams. Maybe that's the goal. But I think the goal is to understand what's at play when you look at chemistry versus culture. And with chemistry, I think the focus is more on the properties of the chemical compound, the system, so to speak, when all of those elements are in play. And we don't have to attach favorable adjectives. If we say something like a healthy chemistry, usually we mean greater variance of unalike things and not less. So how do we emphasize chemistry over culture? There are many ways to do this. I have time to only share one with you. I think it's an easy one, and you can start doing it today, and it is this. Just talk about it. Be the voice and start talking about the thing that matters to you. I'm going to give you a couple examples of this. This handsome bearded fella is Mike Davidson. He was the former VP of design at Twitter here in the city. When he arrived at Twitter, there was a male to female ratio, 80-20, 20% female, 80% male. But within a year after his arrival, it was at parity at 50-50. What happened in Mike's first year at Twitter to bring that team to gender parity? The answer is pretty simple. Mike, just as I talked to Mike about this, he said, I just started talking about it with my team. That's all I did. And because of talking about it, this is what it led to. I interviewed him on my podcast some time ago. Here's him describing what happened after they started talking about it.
And so, over the course of the next year, we started looking at our applicant screening process, our interview process. We looked at the numbers behind how our team was comprised. And we never set a goal of being 50-50. We just ended up that way, mainly by paying attention.
Some of the greatest movements in organizations, and for that matter in societies, happen merely by giving a voice to the problem. You can be that voice. You should be that voice. Let me give another example of this. So back in the day, you might not know this, but when LaCroix or LaCroix, however you pronounce it, GIF versus JIF, when they rebranded in 2003, I actually did their all-flash site to coincide with that rebranding. This is 2003 we're talking about. You remember the days, right? You've got the interactive... Is this going here? Did it move? Well, anyways, you know how these things worked back then. This was my project back in the day. I was leading a design team, but also functioning as a designer on that team, and this happened to be my baby, at least one of those projects back then. On that same team, about a year before this effort, there was an individual, his name is, there it goes. There was an individual whose name was Blake Scarborough. He's here pictured on the left with his family. We had a design huddle every Friday at 10 a.m. And I asked each person on the team to take a week and present something that they were passionate about. They had 10, 15, 20 minutes to talk about something that mattered to them. Our culture at the time was heavily aligned around table-based code, it was very engineering driven. It was the kind of culture where the engineers would build the thing and then send it over to design to skin it. Do you remember those days? Hopefully you're not living those days now, but back then that was very much the norm. Well, Blake came it was his turn at one of these huddles, and he came and presented, and I remember him standing up, and he says, okay, I went to this conference recently, it's 2002, and they talked about this thing called CSS. I think we should start using CSS. And as he described it, I'm thinking silently to myself, good luck, buddy, with that. Good luck getting us to change from the culture that we have now to that. But he persisted. He was just relentless. And within a few weeks, actually a few months, our entire org had shifted to CSS-based development. I credit, in fact, Blake. Because of Blake's efforts in that one meeting that we had, and his shift to shake up our culture, to the launch of my career and what I've done throughout my career, writing books about CSS and speaking at conferences about CSS. Our movements in our industry, as I said, design systems included, often begin with one person. Be that voice. Talk about it. Put chemistry above culture and shake up the culture when necessary. Finally, third, people over process. You are stewards of systems that span disciplines and teams across the company. You have the privilege and the responsibility to be experts at people, at relationship building, to be experts at putting people above process. The most effective and enduring systems that I know of are the ones that are rooted in strong relationships. Uniformity generally relies on policing and process. Unity relies on collaboration and on relationships. Culture is an accomplice to uniformity, whereas chemistry is generally a partner to unity. I'd like to leave you with 6 suggestions for putting people above process. 1, listen before leading. As system enablers, you are leaders. Whether or not your title carries the mark of leader, listening is the great enabler of leadership. It fosters answering the right question, giving proper feedback, empathizing with those that you lead, and so much more. Design is fundamentally about problem solving, isn't it? Leadership is no different. It's really about understanding a problem and then defining ways to solve that problem. Listening allows for definition, for comprehension, for understanding. So pause to listen before leading. 2, don't be a jerk to work with. I know it sounds crazy, but sometimes we as system stewards can be a little bit difficult to work with. I've been in that position before, and maybe you haven't made the same mistakes that I have. A colleague said to me recently at Facebook, he said, I want to be known. He's a design manager as well. He said, I want to be known for the team that's the nicest to work with in the entire company, because when you're nice to work with, everybody wants to work with you. So be great to work with. Be nice to work with. 3, don't let the essential get lost in the minutia. T.S. Eliot, a great poet, once wrote, where is the wisdom that we've lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge that we've lost in information? I believe as managers, as leaders, as system stewards, we can rephrase his words as, where is the essential lost in the important? Where is the important lost in the good? I would encourage all of us to prioritize the essential in your systems of design. Prioritize unity. Demand uniformity where necessary, but encourage chemistry and creativity by tolerating defensible arguments that might shake up the system, so to speak. Let the unnecessary minutia fall away. Don't give place for it in our systems or in our bodies of work that we're involved in. Empower people to experiment. 4, have strong opinions, but hold on to those opinions loosely. Be willing to have your minds changed by your peers. Be willing to compromise. Be willing to experiment with chemistry. As a mentor once taught me, sometimes it's better to be unified than to be right. Be opinionated in your systems thinking, but be collaborative enough to hold on to those opinions loosely. 5, I know of only one way to successfully ship products, and that is to ship imperfect products. Perfection never ships. It gets stuck in this endless loop of, I'll just fix this one more thing, and then I'll be done, and it will ship. Great designers are in a constant tussle between quality and shipping. And when you ship imperfect products, you place people above process, especially the people that use your product, by getting it in their hands and then empowering you to iterate and make it better. We have a poster that lines the halls of our walls at Facebook that says, "Done is better than perfect." And that's very much the case, at least in my experience. And 6, this is a small one, but in my experience it goes a long way. And that is, empower all the voices in the room to contribute. One of the most effective tools that I know of when running meetings is to use your position as moderator to ensure everyone has a chance to speak. Granted, time and other constraints don't always allow for everyone to speak, but in most cases it is practical to give voice to everyone in the room. And here's my advice to you as the meeting moderator. If there is someone in the room who you might feel has something important to share, or who simply might not have the courage to interrupt others to speak up, ask for their input. It's so simple, and yet it's so hard to remember to do this sometimes. But as the moderator of that meeting, you have the power and the privilege to ensure that everyone has a chance to share their voice in those meetings. And so I encourage you to do that. Compensation indifferences aside, I've found that there are generally 2 things that keep people around at companies longer than anything else. 1, team members believe in the direction and the mission of the team, the product, or the organization, and they feel empowered to help influence change when the direction of that mission goes off course. And 2, they feel that they're operating at their full potential. Little things like empowering people to have a voice in your meetings or in your conversations about unity and alignment can go a long way to empower people to operate at their full potential and to feel that they are an important part of the organization. Gina, how am I doing on time?
We're already late anyway, so I don't know.
We're throwing time out the window?
You're fine.
We're fine.
All right, I'll spend 2 minutes then I'd be remiss to not mention the amazing work that's being done by my colleagues at Facebook with our design system. So let me just wrap up, take a couple minutes to share. I'll mention just one person. This is Shally Nguyen. Shally, in a former life, was a CSS architect. She was later a creative director at Yahoo, and one of the stewards, one of the initial creators of Yahoo's first design system, in fact. Today she's a design manager at Facebook for the interfaces team. They are one of the teams that are the stewards for Facebook's design system. Our design systems have a shared mission of helping other teams, other product teams at the company, ship high-quality, coherent products across the Facebook family of products and apps that we produce. And as I talked to them this week in preparation for speaking with each of you, the word they kept coming back to was facilitators. They said, Cameron, we facilitate teams and empower teams to get things done. We don't police, we support them, we facilitate them. Prior to Shally's involvement and other teams like it, this was our design system at Facebook. This is a screenshot of our Dropbox folder where we dumped all of our assets in there, and designers would basically cherry pick from this Dropbox folder when they needed stuff. That was our alignment back in the day. We've come a long way since then. We now have tools that are built into, this is Interface Kit, that provide all kinds of tools that are built into the tools that they already use, plugins I should say, that are built into the tools that they already use. Here, for example, this is one of our most important parts of the Interface Kit, and that is the component library that's built into Sketch. And so designers, as they need components as they're comping and sketching, they will go in there and grab, say, a newsfeed component and drop that into their file, and off they go. These are all very highly integrated with Sketch, with Origami Studio.
I think we're just going to come into
As a company, we focus on impact, and this philosophy of focusing on impact goes all the way down even to this team that is working on the design systems. It's embedded across the company, and so this team, in fact, this team will measure the usage of our tools related to our design system on a regular basis. Generally, they're talking about this weekly to gauge how the components are being used and whether or not they are accomplishing the objectives that they set out to accomplish. As just an aside, by the way, Shally, her team, she'd mentioned when I talked to her yesterday, they are looking for additional people to help in 2018. And so if that's something you're interested in, please come talk to me and I'll put you in touch with Shally. So to wrap up, unity over uniformity, chemistry over culture, people over process. Welcome to Clarity Conference. You're in for a wonderful ride. Thank you for having me today.